Scale Up Show. This is your host, Ryan Staley, and I have a very special guest with me today. I have Andy Paul. Andy is the host of the Win Rate podcast, which I've been on a couple times now. He's also the author of 3 best-selling books, including Sell Without Selling, also the CEO and founder of Zero Time Selling. Andy's a legend in the podcasting space. Started his, 9 years ago, touches over a couple 100,000 on LinkedIn every day. Does the same thing with a massive newsletter as well. And then he just won't stop there. He loves the podcast aspect, and it's been a blast to be on. Andy, welcome. Happy to have you on the show, man.
Ryan, thank you for having me.
Yes, I take a break. I have a lot of SaaS founders, AI founders on the show. And then occasionally, very occasionally, I'll have thought leaders or people that are experts in their field that really impress me. And you did when I was on the show. You've done a lot of speaking as well. And so I'm really excited about having you on today, man. And I wanted to get into a few things today.
Sure.
So one of the things is your background is super interesting. And I mentioned, kind of kick things off, you've been podcasting for 9 years, which I love. I'm on 4. So I'm like a baby compared to where you're at, right?
Yeah, but anybody can do 4 is great.
One of the things that I love is just how you built it from zero to basically a podcast, the one you before that you sold and moved on to other ones and then created a massive following on LinkedIn. Walk us through that, man. What were you thinking? How did that all take place? We'd just love to hear your journey on it.
Yeah, what was I thinking? No, actually, I was inspired to start this podcast. I was at a conference somewhere, and who did I hear talk? John Lee Dumas. I heard him speak.
Yeah.
And if you don't know John Lee Dumas, a big business podcast. He was a young guy out of San Diego, but had just built this massive podcast. And so I was hearing him speak, and I was thinking, well, yeah, that sounds like a fun way to create content that people will find valuable and perhaps easier than sitting down and writing a LinkedIn post every day, which, I largely do. But so I thought, well, hey, let's try it. And I recruited my son to help me. And we launched this podcast really knowing nothing about it, other than we subscribed to. John Lee Dumas had a community that you could subscribe to called Podcast Paradise, I think, or something like that. Had a series of great videos, just take you through step by step how to set up your podcast. So yeah, we watched the videos, we set up the podcast and launched it in the fall of 2015. And I really didn't know what to expect. And it was, at first no one's listening to it because no one knows who you are. But sort of the thing for me was just consistency, right? As we had this goal is that maybe we could be an everyday podcast. We didn't start out that way, but we grew there fairly quickly. And then we really focused on LinkedIn with promoting the podcast and trying to do something a little more effective than what I'd seen other people do, which was not just a post saying, hey, here's our new episode, but for every episode we'd create a topical post that looked like a real post, right? That talked about an issue. And then at the end you'd see, well, hey, link in the comment if you want to listen to the episode. And that just sort of worked. And we started being consistent with it. We did go to 5 days a week for a while. We scaled back to 3 after a few years because we're getting feedback from the audience that it was just too much content and they didn't have time to listen to all of it. And it's just consistency, I think, is really the thing that I keep coming back to, is that I think a lot of podcasters miss is, I'll talk to new podcasters in the sales space and they want advice and they'll say, we're thinking about doing, 10 episodes and maybe doing seasons. And it's like, sure, I get it. Some people want to do seasons and they don't have a lot of time, but really what you're trying to do is you're trying to sort of train the audience that you are going to be there at a certain time or a certain point in time every week, talking about certain things they want to hear about. And if you can have that consistency, that really starts to make a difference over time, provided you're creating good content.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. And it's very intimate to be able to get into someone's ear and have them hear you repeatedly over a long extended period of time and build that connection with them. I think the whole consistency piece is huge, right? Because if you drop in and then drop out, then new habits are formed and it doesn't quite hit. And like part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this is because attention and distribution is at such a premium right now, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
you see all the social media networks for the most part like ratcheting down organic reach, and they're really leveling up the quality that you need to provide in order to penetrate that. And so I think like something like a podcast is different in terms of how you could connect with someone at an individual and a one-to-many level. So I guess like what's your take on like podcasting, connecting, growing an audience, growing a business and a personal brand right now in 24? Because I know you recently started another podcast. You're potentially looking at other options as well. So we'd just love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, to your point, yeah, it keeps changing, right? But I think that the ultimate size of the audience, depending on what you're trying to do, isn't really the issue, right? It's really the right audience. And it's just like on LinkedIn, you know, the number of followers you have isn't really relevant. There are people who are building sizable businesses as, you know, trainers and coaches and lean mastermind groups and so on, with relatively small followings. But they're really connected with that following, right? They're really engaged. They're really targeted very well. I think that's really the key is if you're trying to use a podcast, let's say, to help prospect, which I think is a great use of a tool. What's the audience you're trying to reach? And, you know, what's the best way you think you can reach the people that you want to have listen? And that then becomes the challenge, right? And it gets back to the end. You still have to have good content that people want to listen to. And so even if you find the right people, if you're not bringing them back, to your point, with the attention time after time, then yeah, you may have reached them one time, but you're not going to get them back time after time after time. And that's so for me, over all the years that I've been doing this, my focus has always been is I can be as prepared as I can, be over prepared for every conversation. With my first podcast, you know, that I did for 8 years, I guess, is an interview show, and interviewed a lot of authors, for instance. I would commit to reading the author's book. I didn't commit to them. I committed to myself that I was going to read the book because I really wanted to know what they were talking about. I wanted to know the theses they were promoting, the perspectives they're trying to promote. And if I just took their questions that they wanted to give me, then, you know, I'm not going to really get into it for the purpose of the benefit of the listener. So yeah, I would make that investment. And I think it showed in the quality of interviews that we had, is that we really went deep. And I, as a matter of policy, I wouldn't accept suggested questions from guests. And perhaps even more importantly, I wouldn't tell the guests what questions I was going to ask ahead of time. So they had to show up and be prepared to talk about their material, their content. And you'd be surprised how hard that was for some of those people. So
really?
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think that, and I understand that to some degree, is, you know, if you put a lot of effort into writing a book, by the time it actually gets published and reaches the market, there's been this gap of time, and you almost have to go back and reread your own book again to really remember what you wrote. But yeah, some people had sort of thin arguments, let's say, about whatever point of view they're promoting. And I wouldn't hesitate to challenge it, as I don't today when I have people on my podcast. And I think I don't see it as a public service necessarily, but that's just my own curiosity and my own point of view. Is something doesn't make sense, if the dots don't connect, I'm going to challenge it because I want to understand it. And to my point, it was surprising the number of times people couldn't connect their own dots.
You know what? I can see that. And I remember when I was on your podcast, you challenged me and I had no problem with it, right? You're just like, I don't remember exactly what you said, but you're just like, all right, well, I disagree with that, or I go here. Like, and that's fine. Like, I think that's healthy, right? Like, you don't want to be the nodding, the agreeing with everybody kind of host, right? No matter what they say or what they talk about, because you'll obviously conflict yourself multiple times over.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many points of view in sales, and there's so many people that put themselves forward as experts, especially on LinkedIn, right? And Yeah, I like to say is, how hard could selling really be if so many people are supposedly experts at it? Maybe it's not. Maybe there's another issue at play here. But yeah, I mean, there are a million different ways to think about how to do the job, and for me, the bottom line is, does it work or not? Right? It
Yeah.
doesn't have, it may not work for me, but does it work for somebody else, and does it work consistently for them? Then that's a valid point of view. I don't claim to be the oracle that all knows all about sales, because I don't think that resource, that person exists. What I know is, from my set of experiences and the experiences of lots of people that practice what I talk about, that it works for some set of people. And that's what we're trying to do really on social media and podcasts. So you're trying to find those people.
Yeah.
And those that try it and don't think it works, or don't want to try it, that's fine. There's others.
Very true. Very true, man. In terms of you've interviewed probably close to 1,000 people or more than that.
Given repeats and so on. Yeah, I'm sure. Yes. Lots of really smart people. I mean, doing a podcast, especially an interview podcast, or any podcast, but an interview podcast, as opposed to just somebody doing a solo episode, talking about themselves, is really kind of a selfish thing to do, because I take away more from it than I think the guests do, or perhaps even the listeners, because I'm talking to these really smart people, and I've learned, I can't begin to sort of catalog what I've learned over the course of doing it. So for me, that's part of why I continue to do it, is this dedicated lifelong learner, and it gives me a real easy excuse to talk to interesting people and have them come on the show and continue to learn.
Yeah, I love it for the same way, man. I think it's amazing the access that you get from the access to people, as well as the insights you get just from talking to experts continuously, right? And then you get to connect with people, develop relationships. And so here's my following question for you, kind of wrap up this episode, is what were the 3 most impactful insights that you over the history of recording the podcast? I know this is a tough loaded question, right? But just go whatever comes to mind. So give me the name of the guest and what was super insightful that they said.
I'm laughing just because impossible for me to answer, right? I mean, it's when you've produced over 1,300 episodes in total, and
well, give me one then. Give me one of your favorites. That's all. I'm not gonna hold you to the wall, dude. I know it's tough, right? Because people ask me that sometimes too. Hey Ryan, give me the best guest you've ever had of this, and I'm like, this person was amazing at this. This person was amazing at that.
I don't think honestly, I don't think there's one particular sort of blazing insight that's really stood out. But for me, the things that resonate, and I sort of hesitate to name names, is just people who are very thoughtful about this whole thing, right? Because this whole thing being, the profession of selling and the act of selling, because we're in this mode, certainly in the tech world and software, where over the last 20, 25 years, it's all become about the process, right? Everybody wants wants to leverage the technology to make sales this cookie cutter thing that, we have the process and we insert anybody in there, they can succeed. And what we found time and time again over this period of time is that that's just not how it works. And, people tend to confuse and conflate this idea of corporate valuations with selling success, and they're not connected. Even though we've been through several sort of bubble periods during that time. So it's, for me, is I really appreciate people that just think deeply about this idea about how do we actually go about this business, and understand that it's not about process. Yes, there is a process. We all have sort of an inherent process we develop, but it's about the people and the people we meet and how we help the people that we meet, and the perspectives we take into the job that we're doing. And again, there's lots of people just want to surf sort of the crest of the wave because they think, hey, this is what's happening, this is the way we want to do it. And then there's others that I see who are achieving consistent success at high levels, And what distinguishes them is that, yeah, they're much more thoughtful about it. They're much more rigorous in their approach to how do they qualify prospects and opportunities into their pipeline? How do they, interact with them at every step of their process in order to help the buyer make their decisions? And the world sort of, for me, divides into those that are prepared to be thoughtful about it and those who just, want to execute a process. And I think that it's sort of a paint by numbers type thing. And it's not. It's never going to be sales. It's never going to be a paint by numbers thing. But it's those are people that sort of stand out for me. And they come from all walks. And some were just individual contributors. Some were sales leaders. Some were thought leaders. Not all of them. A lot of thought leaders that are kind of superficial, despite and some were, college professors that you wouldn't necessarily think, okay, well, that's sort of out from left field, but a number of college professors that just, people are thinking about this. And I think this is, as advice for sellers in their career is this ability to be thoughtful, the ability to think ahead, the ability to develop a perspective about your circumstances, how you can respond to them, as opposed to just responding automatically, right, or reflexively. Really makes the difference in the long run. And I was thinking about this over the weekend because a couple of days ago, I unfortunately was at a memorial service for the gentleman who was my key mentor in my career, in my sales career.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
And well, we're all getting older and things happen, and he certainly passed away way too soon. But the thing that stood out about him is just, again, this idea, and what I learned from it is just this approach of just being thoughtful about everything. And I was listening to family and friends, stand up and tell stories about him, and as I was listening to it, just like it really sort of just hit me, hit home with me very powerfully, is that the words that kept talking about him are the same words that I use to talk about in sales, right? And so clearly his impact on me was so strong, but it was this, he was always, besides being a great technologist, but he was just this, human first person. And he believed in the importance of relationships. He was hugely curious and, not just a learner, but curious about people he was interacting with, and driven to want to understand the things that were really motivating and driving them at a deeper level. And then he was just boundlessly generous to be able to help them make their decisions. And those words, the connection, curiosity, understanding, generosity, those are the words at the heart of my most recent book that I wrote. It's just like, oh, that's where they came from, right? And this is sort of a long-winded answer to your question about people who had impact. But there are people that I've interviewed that I could see could be those types of mentors to people, that if people were willing to listen to them and read them and so on, they would understand that it's, this business we're in is hard, it's complex. I think it's really pretty simple, and it doesn't require much more than those four attributes, these four traits that I was talking about, is a willingness to connect with another human being, to build some credibility and trust, which all the data shows is the number one factor that influences decisions of B2B buyers is trustworthiness. But when you have that trust, then it opens the door to be able to ask the type of questions you need to ask to get deeper than, the superficial discovery questions that 99.99% of all sellers ask. And if you can do that, then you can that opens the door to really understanding the things that are most important to the buyer and the opportunities they want to achieve. And then you got to help them, right? The only reason somebody talks to you as a salesperson these days is because they need your help. They need your help at some dimension to be able to make a decision about whether or not to make a change. And if they decide to make a change, who to make that change with. And if they're talking to you, you got to figure out, well, what help do they need from me? And if you can figure that out, then you've uncovered the path to. But none of that is about fancy sales skills or techniques or methodologies. It's just being a human being first and foremost. And it's something that I believe that successful sellers do that both in their personal lives and in their selling lives, that, they're consistent across both. And just the last story about this mentor of mine, which was, such a great story, talking about generosity. He was early in his sales career, and he had a friend that fell on hard times, had a substance abuse issue and had lost a job, and was basically sort of almost living in his car. And this mentor of mine, this friend of mine, his mid-20s, went out and got a second job at night to be able to help pay for rent for his friend.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's awesome.
But that's, would carry over into how you help your customers, right? It's just how you relate to people in general. And so, my big mission, and just start wrapping up this part of it, is, the people I really admire, those that understand that we're one person throughout our entire lives. As we are in our life, we are in sales. And, if we show up interested in other people, if we show up and are curious about things that are important to them, we make a real effort to understand them, if we're willing to give of ourselves to help them achieve what's important to them, we'll succeed on a human level, on a personal level, we'll succeed in sales.
That's great, man. I think there's a lot of, I'm not going to even color commentate too much on it. I think you nailed it. It was a great expression towards your friend, right? In terms of how much he meant to you, but also just about human nature and how important that is when we're selling, connecting, working with people. So we're unfortunately up on time right now, but we are going to continue for part 2. And we're going to take a different approach, man. I want to tap into, so part 1 was about your experience and about podcasting and attention, and also basically connection is what we went into. And now I want to look at, in the next episode, we're going to talk more about what you've seen at scale across the well over 10,000 people that you've spoken to, that in front of in the sales and go-to-market position over the last few years, what's right and wrong with AI from your side of it. And we'll take things from there. So Andy, where can people find you? Where can they find out more about your podcast and what you're doing?
Yeah, LinkedIn? Just start LinkedIn. Yeah, and if you want to listen to my podcast, it's the Win Rate Podcast. Find Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Love it, man. Well, thanks for being on the show. It was awesome having you on, and we will see you on the next episode.
Great.